brought to you by oneaauto.com, your source for quality parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And next time you need parts for your vehicle, think of oneaauto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the upper control arm on this Cadillac CTS 2006. The items you're going to need:
using your 19mm socket and breaker bar, crack the lug nuts loose. Just about a turn is fine. You just want to make sure that there's no tension on them when you jack it up. Obviously, you can't remove it with the weight of the vehicle on the tire. Once your lug nuts are loose, you can jack up the vehicle and secure it with jack stands. You'll see on the rocker panel, there's a small arrow. This indicates where the jack point is on the pinch weld under the vehicle. So we'll place our jack under there, bring the vehicle up until the wheel is off the ground and we have enough height to get a jack stand underneath the car. Directly in front of your jack, you'll notice this boxed frame-like piece of the unibody. That's the point we're going to use for our jack stand. Slowly lower the vehicle onto the stand. Once the vehicle has been raised and supported, we'll finish removing the lug nuts. Remove the wheel from the hub. So we're going to use a lift to make this easier to show you guys at home, but you should be able to do this in the driveway with a jack and jack stands. Using an 18mm socket and ratchet, as well as an 18mm wrench, remove the pinch bolt for the upper ball joint on the upper control arm. Leave the nut flush with the end of the pinch bolt so we can tap our pinch bolt out without damaging the threads. And tap the nut until the pinch bolt's out. Once you know that it's not in there tight, it's all right to give it a couple of light taps without the nut on there. Just be careful not to hit the threads or mushroom the end over. Use your 18mm wrench as well as the socket and ratchet behind the flange nut. We're going to put a little pressure with that 18mm wrench and spin the bolt out. Remove these two 13mm bolts. Steel bolts inside of an aluminum control arm create corrosion because they are dissimilar metals. So be sure to soak these in penetrating oil if you have it available to you. To release the upper portion of the strut, we'll have to remove these four 18mm bolts as well as this 18mm nut. This one here is going to require you to carefully release this AC line and pull it out of the way. Be very careful not to chafe through, kink, or puncture this line as it is high pressure. We're going to break all of our hardware loose with a breaker bar and an 18mm socket. Once it's cracked loose, we'll move on to a ratchet. Before removing the last bolt, you want to reach into the wheel well and hold the shock assembly. Once that bolt's out, remove the strut and upper control arm from the vehicle. Using an 18mm socket and ratchet, as well as a wrench, remove the bolts for the upper control arm. Move the upper control arm from the strut mount. Reinstall the upper control arm. For now, we're only going to put the nuts on by hand, so it'll make it easier to install the control arm back into the spindle, as well as allowing us to put the weight of our vehicle onto the suspension before tightening the control arm, making sure we don't preload the bushings and cause them to fail prematurely. Now our assembly is ready to go back into the vehicle. Reinstall the assembly into the vehicle. Support it with one hand while you line up the hardware. Be sure not to tighten down any bolts until you have all of them installed hand tight to make them easier to line up. Once all the hardware has been installed hand tight, go ahead and tighten it down with your 18mm socket and ratchet. Torque these bolts to 83 foot-pounds. Once the bolts are torqued, clip that AC line back into place. We're using a large screwdriver here to pivot this bracket on the bottom of the strut and make it easier to line up and install our bottom strut bolt. Once the other side's almost down tight, we'll install the opposite bolt. Torque these bottom bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Line up the upper control arm into the steering knuckle. Send the pinch bolt through. Start the nut. Bring it down with an 18mm socket, ratchet, and wrench. Torque the pinch bolt to 44 foot-pounds. While I'm using a screw jack, you can do this with a floor jack. We're lifting up on the bottom of the lower control arm to set the suspension to its normal ride height position. To be able to tighten the top two bolts for the control arm bushings is not to preload them. With the load of the suspension on the vehicle, tighten these bolts with an 18mm socket, ratchet, and wrench. It may be easier to access these with two 18mm wrenches. Reinstall the wheel onto the hub. We're going to bring them down as tight as we can while the tire is still in the air. We'll finish tightening them once the vehicle's been taken off the jack stands. Always be sure to tighten your lug nuts in a cross pattern. So jack our vehicle off the stands. with the weight of the vehicle back on the tire. If you don't have a torque wrench, get them as tight as you can by hand with a breaker bar. It takes a lot of force to break one of these lug studs, so you don't need to go crazy tight, but don't be afraid to put a little bit of your weight into them to make sure they're tight. Of course, if you do have a torque wrench available to you, you'll want to torque your lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. And you can see with the breaker bar, we actually got it pretty close.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope this video helped you out. Next time you need parts for your car, please visit oneauto.com. Also check out our other helpful how-to as well as diagnosis videos.